Much of the Saudi Peninsula is dry and sandy. Humidity reaches its highest levels near the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Saudi Arabia, the largest of the 6 countries that occupy the peninsula, is characterized by a hot desert climate. Major cities like Mecca, Medina, Riyadh, and Jeddah, which were functioning settlements in the 7th century during the time of Muhammad, are located in desert lands with relative humidity that can drop to as low as 2 to 3%. While there is enough precipitation in the southwest to support sparse grassy vegetation, the amount of moisture lost through evapotranspiration is greater than the amount received as precipitation during the entire year. These contemporary weather and climate descriptions take on greater importance when we take a look at the kinds of atmospheric conditions that are depicted in the Qur'an, or the Qur'an. As with the pages of other ancient texts, the Qur'an, combined with paleoclimatic studies, can help us to appreciate the highly complex nature of climate change in history. So today on The Vantage Point, we're going to take a look at 7th century weather and climate as depicted in paleoclimatic studies and the Qur'an. I hope you'll join me. Muhammad lived in the city of Mecca as a boy and young man. As an adult, he moved northeastward to a city called Yathrib, which was renamed Medina, or the city of the prophet. Most of Muhammad's life was spent on the Saudi Peninsula, so it would obviously color his views of the world. Muslims believe that the Qur'an, which means recitation, was revealed to Muhammad over a 22-year period of time. His spiritual journey and the composition of the Qur'an began while he was seeking a cool respite in the cave of Hira. Muslims believe that it was in the cool of the cave that the archangel, Jibril or Gabriel, appeared to Muhammad and instructed him to write down and recite what he was going to be shown and told. Many of the Qur'an's stories and themes are loosely based on events and people depicted in the Bible, the Torah or the Torah, and the Injil for the Gospels of Isa or Jesus. However, a significant amount of material in the Qur'an is expressed as new prophetic information. Nevertheless, for readers conversant with the Bible, there are familiar themes in the Qur'an: evil, punishment, reward, and environmental forces that bend to the will of God, or Allah, which means the God. However, there are serious and profound theological differences among the 3 Abrahamic faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Exploring those differences is way beyond the scope of this discussion, but if you're interested in a deeper theological immersion in Islam and the Qur'an, I invite you to read my book, Puritan Islam, The Geo-Expansion of the Muslim World. Our focus today is on the ways in which the Qur'an discusses and describes weather and climatic events. This is a fruitful exercise because it helps us to gauge the kind of climate changes that have taken place in the Saudi Peninsula since the 7th century AD. In a white paper summarizing the most important and relevant studies on the Levant and the Saudi Peninsula with respect to climatology during the time of Muhammad and the writing of the Qur'an, Michael McCormick and a host of his colleagues described the regional climate. As McCormick et al. Write, and I quote, "North Atlantic sea ice started to advance at that time, and the region began to cool again. A cooling trend persisted until around 800 AD, although no clear evidence of a corresponding increase in regional precipitation exists at the present." Nevertheless, McCormick and his colleagues go on to point out that regional flood events occurred in 667, 716, 724, and 740. The white paper also lists 11 regionally harsh winters that went from between 609 and 718 AD, that is. Logic suggests that more precipitation would have been produced due to cooling trends because cooler air has less capacity to hold humidity or moisture. As a consequence of colliding air masses, atmospheric uplift can create volatile storm events and perhaps even flooding. Unlike the Bible, which was written over a wide expanse of time, maybe 2,000 years, the Qur'an was written over a 22-year span of time, from 609 AD to Muhammad's death in 632 AD. The Qur'an, it would seem, was written during a cooling trend that featured some harsh winters that no doubt created atmospheric instability as well as warm masses of air that were pushed aloft by aggressive cold fronts. Protracted fronts and events like that produce a good bit of surface water flow and the formation of small lakes because of lengthy rain events. Keep in mind that today there are no permanent water bodies like rivers, ponds, and lakes in Saudi Arabia. There are dry riverbeds called wadis that can flood during convective storm events, typically in the summertime. As we'll see in a minute, geotheological imagery in the Qur'an certainly supports the occurrence of the kinds of unstable weather events that would be produced by a cooling trend like the one described in McCormick's white paper. Geotheomisthosis and geotheocalasis narratives in the Qur'an conjure up images of lush gardens, rivers, fire, thunder, lightning, and even a tornado. The Qur'an features a number of geotheological narratives that show life-giving water coming down from clouds and flowing through rivers while nourishing green gardens. As I mentioned earlier, there are no permanent flowing or stationary water bodies in the Saudi Peninsula. In Surah 2:22, notice how the Qur'an describes part of the hydrologic cycle. Who made the earth a resting place for you and the heaven a canopy, and who sends down rain from the cloud, then brings forth with it subsistence for you of the fruits? Therefore, do not set up rivals to Allah while you know. End of quote. The kind of rainfall that is described in 2:22 is typical of the slow passage of a stationary front. Rainfall during a stationary front is relatively gentle and steady and can last for more than a day. Even today, farmers love this kind of rain. Not surprisingly, the Qur'an promises that there's a sign in the hydrologic cycle for those who listen. In a message that is reminiscent of the refrain echoed in Job 1:21, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away," the Qur'an tells of a tornado that destroyed a man's bountiful home and garden and his other belongings. In this particular narrative, we can see that there was flowing water, lush vegetation, and most importantly, a distinctly different weather event that would be virtually unheard of in today's Saudi Arabia. The environmental setting in the narrative was a scene with which Muhammad's followers would have no doubt been familiar. Does one of you like that he should have a garden of palms and vines with streams flowing beneath it? He has in it all kinds of fruits, and old age has overtaken him, and he has weak offspring, when, lo, a whirlwind with fire in it smites it so it becomes blasted. Thus Allah makes the communication clear to you that you may reflect. End of quote. As in the Bible, a Quranic whirlwind is a tornado. While it's possible that the use of whirlwind was hyperbolic, the nature of the destruction suggests a literal weather event. Moreover, the writer would have had to possess real-world knowledge of whirlwinds to be able to so precisely describe the consequences of a tornado. Based on the description of the event in 2:22-26, the damage was the consequence of a passage, most likely, of a supercell producing at least an EF2 vortex. With the limited technology of 7th century life, an agrarian and pastoral people, as most of the residents of the Saudi hinterland surely were, having sufficient rain to create surface water flow meant healthier vegetation and greater abundance for cattle and themselves. Surface water flow today only occurs after a rare storm event. It's important to recall that precipitation is caused by two different kinds of atmospheric conditions, or precipitation events as we call it. There's the heat-generated or convective variety that occurs in the warmer months. In these events, the sun warms the Earth's surface and water bodies. Heat is re-radiated as long-wave radiation back into the troposphere, causing air to rise. If there is sufficient lift or instability, a rising air mass cools, and if there is enough humidity, condensation can and will occur. In this kind of rain event, precipitation is local, and the duration of the rather intense rainfall is often less than an hour. Warm fronts produce protracted precipitation that may last for days. These gentle rains are highly desirable among farmers. The precipitation is not violent, does not disturb or erode loose soil, and percolates down into the root zones of soil. A cold front, on the other hand, typically produces rapidly rising and sometimes rolling masses of air. Precipitation is often intense. Hail may form and high winds with a squall line are produced. Cold fronts can produce supercells in which tornadoes can form. About 1 out of 6 supercells spawns one. When the front passes, cold air settles in, and there's often a significant drop in air temperatures. If the Saudi Peninsula in the 7th century experienced a cooling trend, as suggested by McCormick et al., the Qur'an would provide examples of the passages of cold fronts. Such is the case in Surah 3:117, and I quote, "The likes of what they spend in the life of this world is as a likeness of wind in which the intense cold that smites the seed produce of a people who have done injustice to their souls and destroys it." An obvious benefit of rain is flowing water that supports lush vegetation. Although Saudi Arabia has a number of wadis, it is important to keep in mind that they only contain intermittent streams and infrequent deluges of water. Most of the time they are dry riverbeds. When there has been sufficient precipitation, the water table rises around these wadis and is within reach of the taproots of trees. So tree stands that are really too small to be called a forest can become established in wadis. The same phenomenon occurs in the western Great Plains of the United States, where river bottoms support stands of cottonwoods. The kinds of images that we will see in this section go beyond the vulnerable nature of the ecosystem in today's wadis. The fact that Muhammad and his followers recognized these kinds of lush settings tells us that flowing water and greenery were not unusual. In Surah 16:10 and 11, a setting is described that conjures up, in my mind anyway, images of wine country in Italy and Southern California. In those two verses, various plant species are mentioned. He it is who sends down the water from the cloud for you. It gives drink, and by it grow the trees upon which you pasture. He causes to grow for you thereby herbage and the olives and palm trees and the grapes and all of the fruits. In Surah 20:53-54, another plentiful lush description is given. In this and other cases, Muhammad uses the pronoun we as he tells his followers that we sent down water from the cloud, then thereby we have brought forth many species of various herbs. Eat and pasture your cattle. Later in Surah 80:27-32, Muhammad again describes a variety of plant species, including thick gardens, palms, grapes, various fruits, grains, and clover. The mention of clover is especially significant because the best time to plant clover in the spring is from mid-April to mid-May to coincide with spring rains. Clover needs about 30 inches of rain a year, sometimes maybe up to 45 inches, and grapevines too need at least 30 inches of rainfall per year unless they are irrigated, but you're going to see in a minute that probably wasn't the case. While too much summer rain can cause gray rot and other diseases, grapevines nevertheless need some summer rain to maintain vigor. Spring rains are most important, however. Incidentally, these geotheological images stand in stark contrast to the weather and climate conditions in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Tornadoes, or whirlwinds, need aggressive cold fronts that overpower masses of moist, warm air. They're virtually unheard of on today's Saudi Peninsula. The fact that clover and grapes were grown in the 7th century suggests a much wetter climate, cooler too. In summary, the geotheological narratives in the Qur'an lend strong support to the white paper written and published by Michael McCormick and his colleagues. Climate on the Saudi Peninsula was cooler and wetter in the 7th century than it is today. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's journey into an examination of weather and climate events found on the Saudi Peninsula in the 7th century AD. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again here on The Vantage Point.